Hi, I'm Nick. I'm the Minuteman Theory Y guy. And this is podcast episode number 5. We're going to be talking about the Operation Paul Bunyan, stress indoctrination. We're going to touch on the kind of current events with what's going on with the Department of Government Efficiency, D.O.G.E. Ian, how are you doing today?
Good. I'm Ian, the lead scary things expert with Minuteman Theory, and I'm going to be going over the stress indoctrination part of the podcast. And as you can see today, I have a sidekick. We decided to do it inside today because it's been cold. Oh, goodness. It's been cold and snowy, and I just wanted to kind of see a little bit of green. As you can see, we're currently in our plant room in my house, and this is my sidekick, Ivy, who doesn't understand that I have an internet persona to play, and yet, that I'm no longer an internet tough guy when there's a dog around.
And I am Brad. I am the founder of Minuteman Theory, and I have no dog on my life. But yeah, okay. So, Ian, you wanted to talk about stress indoctrination. Can you explain what you mean by that? What does that mean?
So stress indoctrination is making difficult things even more difficult, right? So let's say, for example, you want to make a fire, okay? Stress indoctrination, the way to make a fire under stressful conditions is to make a fire where it's raining or it's snowing or all of the tinder that you have, you don't have any tinder, so you have to go out and find it. It's adding extra steps and making things more difficult than they need to be, so that when the time comes, you have the skill set. You already have that skill set. It's not something that's foreign to you. So the way that your brain works is that it's like a computer, right? You have your long-term memory storage and you have your short-term memory storage. You find yourself in a situation and your brain goes through these files and it says, okay, what can I apply to this particular situation? In policing, we do it all the time. That's a huge thing in policing. So you're constantly thinking to yourself, okay, what happens if? So let's say you and I are talking, we're just having a conversation, but I think to myself, okay, what if he pulls a gun? What am I going to do? You're constantly thinking about these things and putting yourself into hypothetical scenarios, not only in your mind, but physically, right? Like we just got back from the range a few days ago where we had. I really wanted to do some stress indoctrination. So what we did was we got the timer out and we shot at super close range. This wasn't any long range stuff. This was just us, the timer, doing magazine reloads, doing all these things, all these intricate things, because we want to get better with that. We want the muscle memory. According to Masad Ayub, it takes 3,000 correct repetitions to cement something in your brain. So every morning before shift starts, I put my body armor on, I draw my gun 10 times. Every single time, every single shift, because I want that imprinted in my brain so that it's done correctly every single time. And it is a textbook draw. It's up, can't, and then out. So I make sure that it's done because I want to get that muscle memory, and then under stress, I will revert back to that because it's already been imprinted in my brain.
Yeah. No, and that range day, we did film that, so that will be up on the YouTube channel. It might already be up once this airs. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that was a lot of that was new for me. Like, we did that drawing and then shooting like immediately out from drawing with just one hand. That was more intense than I expected. And it's definitely good. And then I learned some stuff about the way I've been carrying extra ammo. It was not the right way to do it. But you only learn that stuff if you actually put it through its paces and practice those things.
Well, what it boiled down to was, the video where I can't start a fire to save my life.
Yeah,
I can start fires. Like I do flint and steel. I've done ferro rod. I've done magnifying glass. I've done X and Y and Z as far as making fires. But that snow getting into everything just totally put a monkey wrench in the works. Now, if we extrapolate that out to, if I don't get this fire going, if I don't get this fire going, I'm going to freeze to death. That's kind of what I mean as far as stress indoctrination, as far as getting your mind having these files that it can work with, learning lessons and things like that.
Well, it's like I think everybody kind of understands the basic principle. Like when it comes to weightlifting, like you lift the heaviest weight you possibly can. Like I've just recently started going to the gym for the first time in my life, and it's been great. And I've noticed that like we our water's not that great, so we get like the 5-gallon jugs from the store or whatever, and they're so much easier to pick up now because I'm lifting way heavier weights. It's not that I'm lifting those weights all the time. It's that I'm pushing myself to my extreme. So then what I actually encounter is way easier than it would have been normally.
Yeah. Well, I think it even goes, I mean, that's a great example that there's no growth without stress, and that is physically with like lifting weights. That's physically with drawing your gun with proper form over and over and over, but even like mentally pushing yourself through, putting yourself in, I don't want to say putting yourself in dangerous situations, because you shouldn't do that.
Right.
Putting yourself in
Challenging situations.
Yes, that's the right word for it. Challenging situations to push yourself mentally and stretch your brain as well.
Well, and I don't mean to bring up the school in every single podcast, but it's applicable. So like we talk to the learners about like they set their own goals, and the point is for them to set a goal that's in their challenge zone. It's not comfortable, but it's not so much that they start panicking. There's this zone of it's hard and it grows your brain. And so that's like that zone of constantly pushing yourself a little bit further. Because the other point is like, if you've had the same goal and you've achieved it for like 2 or 3 weeks, it's not challenging anymore. Up it a little bit. And so it's constantly pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself to see what you can really do, so that then when you encounter something in real life that's not nearly as stressful, it's not the same kind of, you don't panic like you would have if you'd never been through that.
Right. And, a perfect example is I had got into a fight couple of weeks ago in the jail, and it was easy. Like I forgot how easy it was because I train. I mean, I'm constantly training and getting on the treadmill, and I have a man-sized target or a man-sized simulacrum that I use to practice my hand-to-hand and fighting techniques and things like that. And so when I did take that punch to the face, it wasn't like, oh my God, it was like, oh, I've just been punched in the face, I better fix this problem.
Yeah. I think you talked about that in the previous episode.
Yeah.
A couple episodes ago.
Yeah. That would have been the New Year's special.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But and the same thing goes for so I'm going to do an entire series on this, but just for brevity, you should be practicing your firearms and your survival skills while your heart rate is super high, because basically you have gross motor skills, you have complex motor skills, and you have fine motor skills. Okay, as your heart rate goes up, let me make sure I'm getting this right. You lose your complex motor skills first. So the ability to move, like little screws and little things like that, you lose that ability. That ability is gone. Your heart rate is through, it starts at 140 beats per minute. At 140 beats per minute, you can no longer start to do the fine, minute tasks. At 160 beats per minute, you lose the ability to do the complex tasks. So you can't do a roll and a crunch and this and that and the other thing. It goes from, but after 160 beats per minute, then you have your gross motor skills. Gross motor skills are caveman things: pushing, pulling, grabbing. And so you could argue that reloading firearms under pressure would be a complex motor skill. You want to, I run on the treadmill and I work on magazine reloads. I work on, I have dummy rounds. I work on clearing jams and malfunctions and things like that because I want my hands to be able to do it. That's what I mean as far as stress indoctrination, because when you're faced with a life or death situation, your adrenaline is going to dump, period. And you lose your ability, like people talk about tunnel vision. That's the same thing, because your brain is taking all the blood away from your eyes and making you focus on one thing to get it to your core, because it wants to protect all of your core, your vital parts, and it doesn't really care about your fingers or your hands or anything like that. Those are like not as important. So you want to make sure that you're practicing those things while your heart rate is super high. And another way to do that, that's a physical way. A mental way is like we did. It was just you and me and a timer, but it was still, there was that level of stress because I didn't want to look like an idiot in front of you. I didn't want to look like an idiot in front of the camera. And then that beep adds, what I mean? It's like, oh, I have to go. Like it's, it
Oh yeah.
kind of,
Well, I think for me, like the anticipation of the beeps.
Yes.
Because it's like random when it beeps.
Yes.
You're like waiting there, like, when is it gonna go? When is it gonna go? And then it finally goes, and then you're like, I gotta do this thing real quick.
Yes.
And then for me, I ended up like dropping mags on the ground by accident and all this stuff.
But it was a good learning experience.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, and that fight, flight, or freeze that you get into in those kind of situations, they're like fundamentally just reactionary. It's just you go into this autopilot. So if you can incorporate these other skills into that autopilot, make them to where you have that muscle memory of you can do them without thinking, then your body can access those when you get into those moments of like, oh, this is how I react to this situation. Just do it without you having to like prep or anything.
Right. And that's when you have to start thinking your way through things, that's when things start to get weird, because you're not thinking correctly. So it's good to have those. First aid's another one. First aid is another perfect, another really good example, because it's going to be it's never a non-stressful situation when you have to use your first aid skills. Every single time it's going to be, oh my God, you're bleeding, your friend's bleeding, your family, somebody is bleeding or choking, and you need to be able to react without like forgetting all of whatever it is that that you've done. Right.
Well, and that's training that, like, for example, like a tourniquet, it's pretty simple if you think about it to apply a tourniquet properly, but most of the time, no, probably not most of the time, every time you have to apply a tourniquet, it's like this person is going to bleed out in a minute.
Yes.
Unless you can get this tourniquet applied properly before that.
Yes.
And so it's not only do you have to train that to know how to do it properly, but you also have to be able to do it quickly.
Yes. Yes.
And training, like that one day that we were with Kevin and just like, oh, okay, tourniquet his leg. Like,
yes.
I think that's a good way to train that sort of skill too.
Well, and I'd like to get Kevin more involved and do specific things like that, where it's like, oh no, he's down. Show me how to do an IV. You know what I mean? Like things like that. Because that's in the Army. That's what we used to do. We used to do force on force, and the sergeants would go, okay, you're down. Your buddy has to do this. Go now. And they start throwing flashbangs or throwing CS gas, and it's like get going. Like this is and I got to tell you, in combat, that was very reassuring that we had that training, because it's like I know that I can and my friends will be able to, put aside all the other things that are going on and help me so that I don't end up dead, in a ditch.
Yeah. And there's probably some people who are listening or watching right now thinking like, there's probably never going to be a time that in my life that I'm going to be in a firefight and have to apply a tourniquet or blood clot or something. But there are other situations where those skills are important too. Like, for example, car accident, or like I had a huge scar on my finger right here because I was putting an engine in a truck, and the whole engine and lift fell over, and my hand got caught between the lift and the truck, and I pulled it out like this, and my finger was cut all the way open down to the bone. But if that was my leg that got caught in there, like that would have been a situation where it possibly could have cut something important, and a tourniquet would have been the thing that would have saved my life potentially.
Well, and again, I don't mean to it's not always going to be a firefight. It's going to be falling. I've gone up to shovel the roof and almost taken a tumble down the roof. You know, like everybody is going to need to use first aid on somebody at some point. That I can say that for sure. I can say that. However, being in a gunfight is different. You're not always going to need a gun. You don't always need all this cool high-speed tactical training, but you do need basic first aid, period. Because you will need to use it, and you need to know that you're going to react correctly.
I use my first aid kits all the time. Yes. I have one in like every bag that I take anywhere. There's a first aid kit in that bag.
Nice,
right now. But just like the other day, I was on a network install job, and like literally 3 days ago, and I reached into my backpack to grab a tool, and this tool happened to have a razor blade on it, and I grabbed the razor blade with the tip of my finger. Oh, this one.
Okay.
And I was bleeding everywhere. And it's like, okay, well, I have a first aid kit. You know, I'm going to clean that and put a bandage on it. And then I was fine. But that kind of stuff happens to me all the time.
Right.
Or you slip or brush up against something. Or like when you're hiking out in the woods and you're climbing on logs, it's pretty easy to fall off of a log and land on something pointy, you know?
Or you're hiking through the woods with shorts on and you end up getting a whole bunch of devil's club in your legs, you know? Like,
that's very true. You know what? That's something I don't have in any of my first aid kits, I don't think, that would have been beneficial that day is a pair of tweezers.
Yes. I have since changed that, and now all of my stuff has tweezers.
Yeah?
But yes.
That's something maybe, now I'm just now thinking of that.
I
might have to change my kits.
I can't harp on it enough. You don't need the coolest high-speed tactical training, but everybody needs some form of first aid training because you will use it. You will, regardless, you know.
Well, in building out little tiny first aid kits to keep in your backpack or in your car or whatever, it's dirt cheap.
Yes. And you can even get even cheaper. Last year, prior to getting this going, I did an entire series on my other channel about first aid on a budget. There is stuff that you can absolutely skimp on. Go to the dollar store and buy cotton swabs. The one thing you cannot skimp on, and I will say, is trauma gear. If you're going to buy trauma gear, do not get the stuff made in China. Get the stuff that is built in America that is high quality. Because if you need to put a tourniquet on, you don't need that spindle breaking apart because it's low quality.
Yeah, no, that is true. But high quality trauma kit stuff isn't terribly expensive.
It's not.
I have a really nice tourniquet on one of my main kit, and I think it was only like $30.
Yeah, they're not expensive.
Yeah, it's like a nice fancy one with the Velcro and all.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, get first aid training. Do it.
Yeah,
no excuse.
I feel like this has kind of shifted away from the stress. But anyway, back to this strenuous stuff. This reminds me of The Strenuous Life by Theodore Roosevelt, his famous speech that he gave.
Yes.
And I can't recite any of it, which is kind of pathetic. Right? But he basically was saying what you're saying is like adding stress to your life makes you a tougher, more capable person.
Yes.
Because even if like you're not everybody's going to ever have to like put a tourniquet on. Like you're always going to have first aid, but like not everybody's going to necessarily be in that kind of like trauma care situation. However, everybody is going to have times where they are under immense stress. Like that's just life. Like tragedy happens. And if you have if you've willingly gone through hard, stressful things, then when the unwilling, stressful things happen, you are more prepared to cope with them when they come, and you're better able to like navigate them without slipping into panic or freezing or that sort of thing. Because you'd be like, hey, I've done this type of thing before. I've been through these kind of pressures, so I can make it through.
I think that's true if you have purposefully put yourself through these stressful
situations. That's why I said willingly. I said willingly take on. Because if it's involuntary, then it can just cause trauma and you can just freak out and you can like collapse. But if you willingly say, I'm going to take on this thing that is somehow beyond me, then prove that it's not beyond you because you can do it. then you prove to yourself, I am more than I thought I was. And then when you encounter something that's even bigger next time, like, hey, I can take on this thing too. But you're right. Like if something happens to you that you weren't expecting and you kind of succumb to it, then it can kind of break you down. If you willingly take something on, though, it will always build you up if you push through.
Right. I think if it's thrown on you unexpectedly and you're not prepared for it, something you've never experienced before, such a high level of stress, I think it can actually do the opposite.
Yes. Oh yeah.
But that's why you put yourself in stressful situations willingly, so that when that unexpected one does come, you can deal with it.
And I just want to say that I feel like, stress indoctrination is always is usually a negative connotation, right? Like, indoctrination is but, there's really no other, there's not really another name for it. You know what I mean? It's like you're putting yourself willingly through something so that you grow and you learn as a human, you know what I mean, as a person.
And you're not allowing, like with the indoctrination thing, you're not allowing yourself to come up with another answer. The answer isn't, oh, well, I give up. Like the only answer is, I will make it through this. That's the only acceptable answer. And so that is kind of indoctrination to a point of like, the only right answer is, you will make it through this. So let's go.
Right. Yes.
I don't think indoctrination is necessarily bad. It can be bad, of course.
Yes. Right.
Because people could be indoctrinated through propaganda that twists their perception of reality in a negative or wrong way.
Yes.
But I think it can be a good thing too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, and like I said, and you can do it, and it's not, you can do it all the time. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where, you're thinking about the what ifs. You know what I mean? What if? What happens if this happens, or what happens if that happens? It's giving your brain the ability to work through problems.
I think you have to be careful with that too, though. You do have to do that. Like, I completely agree, and I do that myself. But there is a certain level of, you can't let that take over reality.
Yes.
You can't.
Yes.
You can't be that person that is ultra paranoid of stepping outside of your house.
Yes.
Or whatever, because, oh no, the big bad thing could happen. You also don't want to be the guy that walks around with a scar L shoved down his pants.
Right. Yes. Right.
At any time,
right.
20 gang members could jump him in the alley.
Right. Right.
You have to also still live in reality, that there's a balance.
Right. Oh, I actually, this is a perfect question for Nick. I want to know, are you training for tornado emergencies in your area? Do you have a storm shelter? Is that something that you've thought about, or anything like that? That would kind of go along with what I was talking about.
Yeah. So, and this came from when I was living in Indiana. It was similar, but the house we're in now doesn't have a shelter.
Okay.
If something really bad came, our neighbor does, and he said that we could rush over there, but that would be extra time. So we have a kind of crawl space under our stairs. That's where we go. Now I'm thankful that my wife grew up in Indiana in kind of tornado territory, so she's kind of hyper vigilant. She knows how to go through that. She has some close calls, and so I've kind of taken her lead on that. But yeah, it's one of those that our kids know, like when a tornado comes, this is where we go, this is what we do, we wait. We've done several drills at the school of like, this is where we go, and we go there and we wait. And it's if the news says there's something coming, we go and we wait, and we have a bag in there with water and whatnot that we need, because it's one of those that I've thankfully never been in a situation. My wife's never actually been in a situation where tornadoes hit, but if it did, everything is gone. So.
Right, and that's what I mean as far as your training. That is perfect, and that kind of sums up what I mean as far as the stress indoctrination. As far as you're training for something that may or may not happen, but there's always that possibility that it will.
Well, and it can start really young too. Like that kind of reminds me of. So my son's doing Cub Scouts right now, and we went to the fire department. They were talking about fire safety and that sort of thing. And so, like on the way home, we were talking about like, hey, so if there was a fire in the house, this is what we would do. Their rooms are on the second floor, and I had to have the conversation of like, my youngest is 2, and so now he's probably about the point where like he could take commands and stuff, but at the time he couldn't. So it's like, you guys need to make sure you get out. Try and get your brother out, but if you have to leave him, you have to leave him. And just that conversation was really stressful on my son because he's 5, and so that makes sense. But even just having that conversation and making it clear, like, yeah, this is scary. It's okay to be scared and be worried about this, and it's important that we talk about this so that we can be prepared. Like we even had talked about, like, if the stairs are blocked, you might have to go out your window and you might have to jump out of the 2nd floor and you might get hurt, but it's better being hurt than being alive or than being dead. So like that was a hard conversation to have with a 5-year-old, but I think that approaching it in a way like that prepped him for, like, it wasn't doom and gloom, like this is going to happen. Right. So that when it does happen, he's more prepared. He's not like freezing, like I don't know what to do. Like we've prepped him for, like, this is what you do in the situation, even when it's hard.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something I've noticed, maybe you guys have noticed too. I feel like when we were kids, it was really normal to have like a family emergency plan where, okay, house is on fire or something, here's where we're going to meet up outside the house, or like things like, okay, if the power's out, then we have a little kit with candles and flashlights and a radio, all that sort of thing. And I feel like it was just normal. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, I feel like that isn't as normal. I mean, like, I still do that.
They taught us that in school.
Yeah.
I remember they taught us emergency preparedness in school. If the house is on fire, you meet at the mailbox. It was like, there's all this stuff. I remember stop, drop, and roll. I had, like, that was a normal thing. Do they do that in your school? Because I don't think they do it here.
So we don't do that as explicitly, but there's a lot of stuff that like we would do as public schools that we don't do explicitly in my school. Like I said, we talked about it in Cub Scouts, but I can remember even, and I found out recently that this was not a super common thing, but our school district growing up had a trailer the fire department would take around that they would fill up with fake smoke that smelled like pancakes, so we could practice getting out of bed and crawling out of the smoke to get out of the house.
We did that. No, we did that too. Now that you say that, I remember that. Yes.
Yeah, and so like even that sort of thing, I don't think that that's really common, at least not anywhere outside of Pacific Northwest, I guess, because that's where.
But I grew up in Philly, and I distinctly remember doing that. So
because I brought that up to some coworkers the other day, and they're like, "That's really cool. I'd never heard of that before."
Yeah,
and they even taught us, like if you come up to a door, you use
to touch the door. Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I distinctly remember all that, but
interesting.
Generational, I guess.
Maybe.
Well, I think I suspect that part of it is those kinds of things happen less frequently. Like I suspect that like our power grids become more reliable, and so power outages happen less often. Or when they happen less for not as long. I feel like that's been my experience as an adult. Like the power hasn't gone out for nearly as long as I feel like it had at times when I was a kid. But I also wonder how much of that is related to like safety over freedom, so to speak, of like just rely on the people taking care of you. You don't have to rely on yourself.
That's valid. Maybe. That's valid. Maybe. I was going to say the whole power outage thing, man, you should come to Montana in the winter.
Well, it might be based on where you are. Like I moved from Pacific Northwest to Indiana, and I didn't feel like there were
right.
But
yeah, I will say, so like since I became an adult and like moved out of my parents' house, when I still lived in Washington, there's only one time I can think of as an adult where the power went out for a significant amount of time, and it was only because the tree in front of our house fell over and took out the power line.
Okay.
And it was out for 6 hours or something, and then they had to back up quickly.
Yeah.
But living here in Montana, it's a whole lot more regular. And like just not too long ago, we had an outage that was like 18 hours.
Yes.
And
and you'll have the phone go out. You'll have the internet. You know what I mean? That is just.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's because Montana is still relatively sparsely populated, especially where you guys are? And so, like, do you think that like infrastructure in like the more populated areas has become more reliable and that happens less frequently? Or do you think that I'm just not seeing what I used to see? Or when I was a kid, it seemed like more than it was?
No, I think it's because we're more rural.
Yeah.
Because you're pretty close to a big place with a lot of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Also, it's just hard to run infrastructure here because of all the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
I bet that the east side of Montana probably doesn't have as many problems as the west side.
No, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
It's a lot flatter, you know. And,
Yeah.
But if you were to look like, if you were to imagine like the way technology has moved nationwide, do you think there's been enough advancements that the general experience of the American has been less need for those things? Because when there's a power outage, it's maybe for an hour or two, or do you think that it's still as common as it was, 20 years ago when we were kids?
No, I don't think it's. I think technology is better. I genuinely think the technology is better, and that helps the crews that are restoring power. That helps them do their job more efficiently and better, And now they know they can cut trees down with helicopters, and power lines and stuff like that, which is something they wouldn't have had. So yeah, I think that with technology, it's made things more reliable.
Yeah, but I don't think that negates the need for like a little emergency.
Oh no,
I mean, like,
absolutely not.
You can buy flashlights and tea candles at the dollar store.
Yes.
I mean, and you could put them in a grocery sack and stick them in the closet. Like they don't take up that much space either.
Right.
Well, and it's one of those things that's like, I think the point that I was trying to get at is it's become kind of a false sense of security because we have this complex, well-oiled machine of infrastructure, so to speak, that is just constantly working, constantly repairing when things go wrong. It takes not a very big break in that chain for it to just not get fixed anymore.
And
that takes significantly longer. And so in those situations, you absolutely must have things because if it becomes unreliable, which wouldn't take much, then you have to have something to rely on, which is yourself.
Right. And let's get all conspiracy theory for just a second. It was just found out that China has hacked into a whole bunch of our infrastructure.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
So I mean, like,
I bet they've been in there for years.
I'll bet they have too. I'm not. But what I'm saying is they just found it.
Uh-huh.
That's something to just keep in the back of your mind. It's like
or weather balloons flying in the United States. Chinese weather balloons.
Definitely not a spy balloon.
No. But even you think about setting off a small nuclear bomb from a weather balloon way up high could probably wouldn't do a whole ton of physical damage, but the EMP could take out infrastructure and we could take months to rebuild it.
Right.
So
again, that's why when the power went out here, that was a great stress indoctrination because we had comms. You and I had comms.
Yeah.
I was able to boil water. I was able to make food. Like that was. I'll be honest with you. That was more fun for me than anything. The only part that really sucked was losing some meat in the freezer. I mean that kind of sucked, but I mean it was like this is a good learning experience.
Yeah, we have like a chest freezer in the basement, and freezer upstairs, and we thankfully we had enough space in the downstairs freezer that all the meat that was upstairs, we just rushed it downstairs, and it stayed cool long enough that none of it even thawed. Nice. Yeah, and then cooking, because we have an electric range.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so. Just like, it's an excuse to just grill.
Yes, I use my camp stove. I use
I use my Blackstone.
Yeah, like honestly, it was more fun than anything for me.
Yeah, the only downside for me is I couldn't get any work done.
Right,
but it was kind of nice because then I had like a little vacation.
Right.
But yeah, and by the way. Just so everybody knows, if the power's out and the stoplights aren't working, every intersection becomes a four-way stop.
Unless it is a main arterial and you are coming onto the main arterial. The main arterial has the right of way.
Really?
Yes. So like Highway 2, California, all those places, They have the right of way.
Really?
Every time, yes.
Even in town?
Yes.
Oh, man. I saw so many people almost get in accidents.
Oh, yeah, no. If it's a main arterial that's running through your town, right, they have the right of way.
All right. Anyway.
So I feel like I've beaten stress indoctrination to death at this point.
Okay, so then you want to move on to Operation Paul Bunyan?
What large cow was there that?
Oh, it's wonderful.
No.
It is an epic story, a tale as old as time.
Unfortunately, there was no big blue ox, but so basically back. Let's see, when was this? I got notes here. Back in 1976.
Yes.
When after North Korea and South Korea split after the Korean War, and they had the demilitarization zone in between the two countries. During that time, both countries occupied the DMZ. And there was this incident where there was this bridge, there was kind of this key bridge, that one side of the bridge was South Korea, one side was North Korea. And there was this big tree on the South Korean side that was kind of blocking the view of the bridge from the South Koreans and the Americans. And the Americans were like, you know what? Like, that's obstructing our view. The North Koreans could sneak over that bridge, so we're going to go cut this tree down. And anyway, the North Koreans got really upset about this. They're like, well, you can't cut that tree down, even though it's on the South Korean side. And something about it's some sacred tree that their fearless leader planted or thing that's totally bogus. And so they got real upset about this. And so the United States was like, okay, you know what? We're just going to send out a crew to go trim the tree. So they weren't going to cut it down. They were just going to kind of shape it so they could see the bridge better. And they send out this crew of a handful of Americans and South Koreans, and they're out there with pruning tools, and they start pruning the tree, and North Korean soldiers on the other side start being like, you can't do this, and start yelling at them, and they end up coming across, and these North Korean soldiers end up murdering, I don't know if it was the whole trimming crew or just part of them.
But I believe it was part of them.
I think it was just part of them. But they basically killed them with axes and stuff, like really brutal. And so then the Americans, who's president at the time? Gerald Ford?
No, was it Ford? Yes, I believe it was Ford at the time.
Yeah, and he basically was like, we cannot let this fly. So they launched Operation Paul Bunyan. And let me read some of anyway, basically, the Americans were like, we are chopping this tree down. Like, they murdered some of us. We are going to go chop this tree down. Oh, and on top of this, it was big international news that these North Koreans had murdered these people. And the North Korean government 100% denied that any of it ever happened. They were like, nope, we had nothing to do with that. You guys are lying. Our North Koreans would never do that. Anyway, so on August 21st, 1976, at 7 a.m., which is only 3 days after that incident, a convoy of 23 American and South Korean vehicles drove into that area without any warning to the North Koreans. They had no idea. And let's see. In the vehicles were 2 8-man teams of military engineers equipped with chainsaws to cut down the tree. Okay, so 16 dudes with chainsaws show up to cut down.
Oh, it gets way better. Okay, so good.
But then, shortly after they show up, they were accompanied by 2 30-man security platoons from the Joint Security Force who were armed with pistols and axe handles. So they're basically standing there like protecting the guys with chainsaws. But then another team from B Company, commanded by Captain Walter Seafried, had activated the detonation systems for the charges on Freedom Bridge and had the 165 millimeter main gun of their M728 combat engineer vehicle aimed mid-span to ensure that the bridge would fall if the order was given for its destruction. So they basically had explosives on the bridge and like big military artillery trucks pointed at the bridge. Let's see. Oh, also B Company supporting E Company at the bridge were building M4T6 rafts on the river that the bridge was over in case the situation required emergency evacuation by the river. In addition to all of that, a 64-man task force of the ROK Army 1st Special Forces Brigade accompanied them, armed with clubs and trained in Taekwondo. Basically like 40 or 64 ninjas. And supposedly with firearms. I don't know. Let's see. When they parked their trucks near the Bridge of No Return, they started throwing out sandbags that lined the truck bottoms and handing out M16 rifles and M79 grenade launchers that had been concealed below them. Several of the commandos also had M18 Claymore mines strapped to their chests, firing mechanisms in their hands, and were shouting at the North Koreans to cross the bridge. Just like absolutely insane. But then,
I was going to say it gets way better.
Infantry company in 20 utility helicopters and 7 Cobra attack helicopters circled behind them. Behind these helicopters, B-52 Stratofortresses came from Guam, escorted by F-4 Phantom IIs and South Korean F-5s and F-86 fighters. They were visible flying across the sky at high altitudes. Also, South Korea sent F-111 bombers. And let's see. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the aircraft carrier USS Midway had been moved to station just offshore, like not too far away.
So basically, we're going to cut down this tree, and you can't stop us.
They're like, you can't murder our people and get away with it, and so we are chopping down this tree, and there's nothing you can say that is going to stop us. And they're just, basically showing huge show of force. I think my favorite part is the dudes trained in Taekwondo with the claymores strapped to their chest. That's just insane. Like, why would you do that? The DEFCON was elevated because of this. And let's see. Oh, in addition, 12,000 additional troops were ordered to Korea, including 1,800 Marines from Okinawa. During the operation, nuclear-capable strategic bombers circled over the area. Together, Task Force Vieira, which is the guys with the chainsaw, or the original group with the chainsaws plus all the supporting people, consisted of 813 men. Almost all of the men of the United States Army Support Group, of which the Joint Security Force was a part, the South Korean Reconnaissance Company, South Korean Special Forces Company that had infiltrated the river area by the bridge the night before, and members of a reinforced composite rifle company from the 9th Infantry Regiment. In addition to this force, every UNC force in the rest of South Korea was on battle alert. Basically, all those dudes went in there, and then the 16 guys with chainsaws systematically cut down the tree, and then they all packed up and left.
So,
And then the North Koreans finally came out and said, "We're sorry for murdering your people."
I think it was along the lines of, yeah, we don't really care about that tree anyway. We let them take that tree down for what was it, under the guise of friendship or something along those lines.
Yeah. But
so
I just
basically, it was like, we're willing to go to war over this tree. Are you?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But I remember now, it wasn't Fat Electrician, although he's hilarious. It was
I'll have to send you that link. That is
Thoughty 2. You ever watch that?
Yes. It's the Fat Electrician did one on it, and it is wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful. Highly recommend.
I'll have to watch it. I love his videos.
Yes.
He's hilarious. So what do you think, Nick? Do you think well worth it to go to all that?
If it had just been about the tree, I would say no. But if it was like a show of force and avenging the murder of South Koreans and or Americans, then like absolutely, it's a F around and find out sort of situation.
Yeah, I agree.
That was what I thought was the best part about it, was the nuclear capable. I was like, oh man, they were for real. Like,
And the B-52.
Yeah.
And the guys with claymores strapped to their chest. Like, man, those guys they must have thought that all those dudes were insane.
The Rock does not mess around, man. Like, for real, the ROK, they are. I've heard stories about the ROK Marines. Holy God. Like, yeah. They don't care about their lives, like, they're just like, I've heard some crazy stories, I haven't, obviously these are, word of mouth, but I wouldn't mess around with the ROK.
Huh. All right, what was the next thing on our agenda?
D.O.G.E.
Oh yeah, D.O.G.E. Nick, what are your thoughts on the Department of Government Efficiency and what they're currently doing?
So multi-phase thoughts. The first thought is, if they're genuinely cutting federal spending, good, because the federal government needs to have their spending cut. Now, Biscuit, stop.
You got knocked in.
Oh, yeah, heck yeah.
Whether I believe they're white knights coming in to save the day, I'm not sold on. I could absolutely see it being, we're going to shut down your corruption with our corruption, sort of thing.
Right.
That being said, again, cutting federal funding or federal spending, good. What I think is more telling, though, about the whole situation is, for a long time, Congress has been outsourcing their responsibilities of actually writing legislation to the executive. And the fact that the president can come in and do all of this is evidence that Congress has given up way too much of its power. And also that states rely way too much on federal funding. So what I really hope comes of this is Congress wakes up, stops writing ambiguous legislation, starts actually writing what they want to happen, and states say, hey, maybe it's not such a good idea to rely on funding from a branch of the government that one guy can come in and say, hey, I'm not spending this money anymore.
Yeah, I think I didn't think about it that way, but that's totally accurate, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I sure hope that states become more self-sufficient, less reliant on
all these
government.
state schools and stuff where it's like I have a friend that works in a state school, and he said that the federal government basically said, hey, if you keep having like these race-based social clubs and that sort of thing, you're not going to receive federal funding anymore. And my kind of thought process around that is like, So then stop relying on federal funding so you can do what you want. Like, if you rely on the federal government, then they can tell you what to do, whether you like that thing or not. Like, on the left, it happened all the time of the federal government pushing all of these programs. And now they're trying to pull back on all these programs, push the other way. It's like, hey, you can't be pushed or pulled by the feds if you don't take their money.
Well, and that's just it. There is no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as a free lunch with the feds. If they give you money, you're going to have to do something that they want. And then the example is the drinking age. In Montana, forever it was 18, but then the Fed said, okay, well, you're going to make it 18. We're going to pull your money. We're going to pull money from roads. We're not going to, and then all of a sudden it was 21. So there's no free lunches at all when it comes to the federal government.
Yeah, definitely. When D.O.G.E was first announced, first off, I thought the name was hilarious. I thought that was pretty great. But I was in between. Because I thought that, we need to reduce spending, and having some really successful American business leaders head up this thing to help cut waste, I thought was a good idea. However, it's one of those situations where it was like, okay, but technically we're expanding government to try and to reduce government. So as long as, I think what D.O.G.E is doing is generally good, in my opinion, right now. As long as D.O.G.E then, after it's done cleaning everything up, dissolves. Because
if D.O.G.E fills in all those gaps and we end up not actually saving anything, government's the same size, it's just replaced with this efficiency bureaucracy that's incorporated everywhere.
Right, and I feel like we see that a lot with government, where the they say, oh, hey, we have this problem, so we're going to create this department or this program or whatever, and it's only going to be temporary until we fix this problem. Then the problem's fixed, but then you have all these people who are employed, and then they have to justify their jobs, and then this thing continues to exist, kind of like income tax back in 1913. It was proposed to help fund the war, and they're like, it's going to be...
Was it 1913 or was it
1913?
I think it was late. I thought it was 19. I thought it was in the 40s. I thought it was in the 40s. 19 or 19.
I'm pretty sure it's World War I.
Was it World War I?
Yeah.
I thought it was World War II. Okay, anyway, yeah.
But anyway, they were saying like, this is temporary to help fund the war effort, and then we'll roll it back after the war's done. And now it's over 100 years later, and we're still paying federal income tax.
Yes.
So, as long, for me, like D.O.G.E, I think what they're doing is good, but as long as they don't become bloated themselves.
Well, and it's hard because, like, there are people that are genuinely losing their livelihoods, and that I don't think that should be ignored. Like, there are people who are losing their jobs, and that is an incredible, difficult situation for them and their families. That being said, assuming that D.O.G.E is doing what they're saying, they're cutting excess spending and waste, then that's at the fault of the people that created the excess spending and waste, not the people cutting it. So it's one of those, it's like, it's really easy to say, we can't get rid of this because of this horrible thing. But the horrible thing is a result of the bad thing you did like 10 years ago, not because where we're at now. So it's like the university I went to was in really horrible financial straits when they got a new president in. And he went and he slashed a whole bunch of programs that weren't making the university money. But that's because there were financial issues going back 10, 15 years that the previous president didn't address, that if they were addressed when they came up, all of that kind of austerity kind of stuff wouldn't have had to happen, or at least would have happened more gradually over time instead of all at once and all these people losing their majors and that sort of thing.
Right. And some of the jobs too, and this is probably it's gonna sound harsh, and it probably is similar in the situation you described, is some of that stuff, yes, people are losing their livelihoods, or their program is getting cut in their university, but like some of those jobs are just useless. And that sounds really terrible to say out loud, but like it's kind of like that scene in the movie Office Space, where they're the hatchet men come in and they're interviewing all the people, and they get to the one guy And they're like, what do you do here?
Right.
And he's like, well, I take the report to this person. And they're like, so what do you do? It's like that guy's job in that movie was wasteful. And, he probably was a fine person.
But it's better for people to do something meaningful. And if you're doing something that's meaningless, then that's also not good for you. Yeah,
I agree. I think there are a lot of people that find themselves in meaningless jobs nowadays too.
Yeah.
And they're the soul-sucking jobs. They're like, why am I even here? All I do is look at a spreadsheet all day or whatever.
Or they become dogmatic about it and try and force the meaning of their job on things. They're like, oh, well, I have to exist because all of these other things are true that aren't actually true. Or they make mountains out of molehills. Like, oh, this little issue is actually this major issue because I have to be here to solve it, sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, I have a great example of that. And some people are probably going to hate me for this, but that is very true with large corporations' safety departments. And this is a hill that I will die on, because I think a safety department, again, it's kind of like something where it is created to create policies and procedures to keep people safe on the job, but it should only ever get so big. And in fact, it might need to, bloat to a certain point and then reduce in size. Because I worked for a very large company a while ago. We worked in data centers, and it's basically a giant warehouse full of server racks with computers in them. And the type of things that you could get injured with are like the edges of the cases are sharp. You cut your fingers. If you were to drop something out of a rack onto your feet, you break your foot. Some of the equipment was pretty heavy, and so if you were not physically fit enough to lift, some of these are like 80 pounds, then you couldn't lift it by yourself. You had to have two people or a lift or whatever. Problem is, there were certain policies and stuff that were enacted while I was working there, and one perfect example is they changed the policy to require all of the technicians while they were in the data center to wear protective gloves. And the type of work that these guys are doing require really fine motor skill. You have to be able to feel stuff and all that. And my guys kept coming back to me and saying, I can't do this, I can't do that with gloves on. And it was, some of the networking stuff, some of the connectors are really small and you have to pinch it with your fingers, and you just can't do it with the gloves because they're a little bit too bulky. And the policy required you to wear a certain level of cut-resistant gloves. So you couldn't just wear latex gloves.
Right.
Because they're supposed to be cut-resistant. And I pushed back on this policy because the catalyst for the policy was a technician who's not the brightest was testing a server and then looked at the fan in the server and was like, I wonder if that's running. And to test if it was running, he stuck his finger in the fan. And these fans are like this big, and they spin at like 16,000 RPM, like super insane. And so, of course, it cut his finger. And so then that was the catalyst to do this policy. And I pushed back. I was like, what? I was like, how many incidents has there been in the last year that could have, that gloves could have prevented? And the answer that I was given was, it doesn't matter. The goal is 0.
Yes. Oh, yes. And I've heard that too. Yes.
Oh, and I kept pushing back. I was like, that's a stupid goal. I said, 0 is impossible. There's always going to be some risk.
Risk is good for you. You will be sick if you never experience any risk. I am very intentional, like with my kids growing up, to let them be exposed to as much risk as they can handle. Now, I'm always there in case something goes wrong. I'm the backup. But you need to be exposed to risk, like not even the fact of like to do your job well, because there's no job that's 100% risk-free. You can even carpal tunnel from typing. Like you're going to force everyone to wear braces all the time. But it's also a matter of like, kind of sort of back to our original conversation of if you always live in this bubble, then when something goes wrong, you can't cope with it. So you have to be prepped and be aware of all the risks and then be smart about it and learn how to cope with things that come up and how to cope with risks instead of just saying, oh, nothing will ever happen because I have this shield around me.
So it's funny that you brought that up because I ran into the exact same thing at the jail. Yeah. So we have these covers on the doors that are spring, it's a hook and it's a spring, and you pull it, you open the window, you look in, you make sure everything, nobody's dying or anything like that, you shut it, Well, there was one door that, a coworker decided that something had dropped. He dropped something and he goes to pick it up and he cuts his head on top of the door. Right? Cuts his head. And so now, policy is that we make sure that it is latched every single time for every door. It's like, gentlemen, I carry a gun into work every day. You know that I'm trusted with the lives of upwards of 40 people all at one time. And you're going to tell me that because one person did something stupid that now I have to pay for it? And I actually said this in a meeting. I said, okay, then I will give up the scissors in the break room, the sharp scissors we have for cutting stuff out. And I expect you to give me the Crayola ones that are made out of plastic and have the curved blades. Yeah, because it's obvious that if I smack my head on the door, that I'm, that we're going to do this whole thing to change the entire policy, that I can't be trusted with sharp objects. So yeah.
Stuff is just ridiculous. Yeah.
There's absolutely a place for like reasonable safety measures. Like we've done dangerous things. Like, hey, here are things you don't do around these dangerous things, or that you have to do around the dangerous things. We talk about guns all the time, and like here are the rules of firearm safety that you must do every time. But It's also not a matter of like never touch a gun because it could go off and kill somebody. It's like, no, use it in a smart way, mitigating the major dangers of it and understanding, hey, this other thing here, like it's never going to happen. So but if you poke the slide, it's not going to just go off. So you can touch it. It's fine. Like,
right. Well, like in my data center example, like there was certain PPE that the techs had to wear that were reasonable. Like you had to wear some sort of reinforced toe shoe.
Yes.
And it had to be composite toe. It couldn't be steel toe because they had to walk through a metal detector to go in.
Whoa, okay, yeah.
We can talk all about that sometime. That's also an interesting thing. Actually, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about some of that. But anyway.
All I want to know was were you ever able to get one of those Glocks through that were made out of ceramic that doesn't set off a
Glock 7?
Yeah, that's worth more than you or I making a paycheck.
Maybe.
It's from Die Hard.
Yeah. Your reference. But yeah, and then the data halls were extremely loud because you got to think an entire warehouse full of those fans that spin 16,000 RPM. So they had to wear hearing protection. And it's like, okay, those things are reasonable. And then they were provided safety glasses and gloves if they wanted to use them. And then eventually the policy became that they had to wear them. But and basically, if somebody requested PPE, we bought it and we gave it to them. The only exception was KN95 masks, because this was in Oregon.
Obviously pre-corona.
Yeah. This was, we were in Oregon, and so there was a fire season, and the data centers would get really smoky during fire season. So some techs requested KN95 masks, which is totally reasonable. But before we could allow them to wear them, we had to give them a training because they're so restrictive. And if you're working hard wearing a KN95 mask, you could deprive yourself of oxygen. So that was the only one that was extra steps. But Yeah, I heard somewhere, and I don't remember where, but I did not make this up. Somebody else did. But, everybody says safety first, but safety should probably be like third, and competency should be first.
Competency, common sense, safety.
Yeah, there you go. Because you don't need to wear gloves to prevent yourself from.
No, you don't.
You need to not stick your finger in the moving fan.
And the answer to why are we doing this is because I said so, or because the answer should be zero, is not an acceptable answer.
Because the goal should be zero. Well, that is a perfect example, in my opinion, of somebody trying to justify their job.
Yes, fair enough.
Because they're trying to come up with new policies, new ways that look at this metric, we, reduced this by this much and stuff. Please don't fire me.
Right.
Because there's always going to be incidents in the workplace, no matter how minor, whether it's cutting your head on a latch or, sticking your finger in a fan. And so if there's somebody that can say, oh, I can fix that problem when you can't, because it's always going to happen. But if you can say, I can fix the next thing that comes up, then you always have a job.
Right.
That's true. And that's that's funny that we're aiming for zero. That can be extrapolated to a whole bunch of different stuff. You know what I mean? You could be having to come in bubble wrap suits because the Velociraptor could, that's.
Speaking of that, so after that policy came out, there was one of the technicians made a meme, and it was like a guy wrapped in bubble wrap, and it said, workplace technician in 3 months.
Yes, right.
And it got passed around.
That's part of the gun legislation arguments too, of there should be absolutely no gun violence. It's like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You can't pass legislation to where that's going to be the case.
I agree. There should be no gun violence. Yeah. That is not ever going to happen. But no,
there should be no disease.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Well, and violence is an interesting one too, because you could say, let's eliminate gun violence by destroying every gun in the world. Okay, then all the gun violence would cease to exist. There'd be no more gun violence if there were.
It's just knife violence now.
But then it would be knife violence.
Look at England. England is a perfect example of that. Yeah. Now, man, and not be able to protect yourself. That is wild to me.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from being in law enforcement, where there is a will, there is a way, and it doesn't matter. You're never going to legislate. You're never going to legislate morality, and you're never going to legislate, zero of anything. That's just not how it goes.
Not to go off on a tangent, but speaking of the UK and their knife stuff, I watched a video. It's been several months of this guy that lives in the UK talking about his EDC.
Okay.
And it was really interesting what he carried. Some of it is stuff that I would never carry, but it makes sense for his lifestyle and stuff. But what I thought was interesting is he carried a pocket knife for just utility stuff. But the pocket knife he had didn't have a lock on the blade. And he even mentioned it's illegal to have a pocket knife with a lock in the UK. And I made a comment. I was like, that's really weird. Here in the United States, almost all pocket knives have locks because it's considered a safety feature.
Yes.
So that the blade doesn't close on your hand.
And the knives that are the most banned in various states tend to be the ones that don't have locks or are easier to open without locks.
Right. Like a balisong knife or a gravity knife or
switchblade.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I was like, that seems like a weird backwards rule that doesn't make any sense.
Well, it makes sense if you're trying to prevent people from using it as a weapon, because a knife without a lock is going to be really hard to use as a weapon, or harder to use as a weapon than a knife with a lock.
That's fair, but
again, it's again more just trying to ban the weapon as opposed to fix the problem of the violence in the first place.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing. Speaking of knives, when I went to Sweden, my Swedish friend, who we stayed with, worked at a grocery store. And when she'd go to the grocery store, she was issued a utility knife, like a box knife. But she had to check it in and check it out. because it was illegal to like carry a knife there. And I was like,
Sweden, you could have rifles.
Yes, you can. No, that's Switzerland is what you're thinking.
Oh, okay.
Actually, in Sweden, I looked up their gun laws because we were on a train and we drove by a shooting range, and I was like, what? Because I was like, I thought the guns were illegal here. I looked it up. In Sweden, you can own whatever gun you want, but there are certain restrictions on you can only take it
to and from shooting range.
To and from a shooting range or to and from a hunting location.
Yeah, right.
And like you have like a license to own a firearm, and you can only own so many rifles and so many handguns, but you can get a collector's license, which allows you to own more.
So then you could hunt deer with a machine gun. That'd be.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about the hunting laws. But that's the thing is, like, here in the United States, it's prohibitively expensive to own a machine gun.
Yes.
Over there, it's not a big deal.
Right. Okay.
So I thought that was interesting. Now, when you get the collector, you have to like put bars on your windows and weird stuff like that. But in some ways, it's easier to get certain things over there than it is over here.
Right.
Well, it's like the difference between U.S. and Canada gun laws. I know that at least at one point, I don't know if they've changed them, but like short-barreled rifles were legal in Canada, like, and then you can't get them here, like.
Well, you can't
without a tax stamp.
Give the government extra money.
That's right. Pay the king.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of Doge.
Yeah.
Hey, Elon, I want you to take a look at the ATF. Just fix that right up for me, would you please?
Did you guys hear that? I think it was RFK Jr. put out a website for people to propose heads of different things, and Brandon Herrera was one of
Herrera for the ATF. Yes. Yeah. Wholeheartedly support that.
Yeah. He came out with a video basically saying, like, I'm totally down with this. And if I was, I'd basically kneecap the ATF. And I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, he said it was interesting how he. It was just how he proposed he would do it, because he suggests that he would take all these lawsuits against the ATF and basically just make the ATF say, yes, we were wrong. So it sets the precedent so that then going forward, even if they tried to put those powers back in place, there was a precedent in the courts of the ATF admitting that these things couldn't be banned.
Right. Not only that, he was talking about how at first there's certain rule and regulations that they would have to follow, but the ATF has the ability to do 90-day exempt periods. He was like, okay, so we'll do a 90-day exempt period. It closes this day, and then another 90 day. I was like, yes.
Yeah. Well, and he was saying, like, well, if you do enough of those in a row and enough people go out and buy these things, then they're no longer unusual. They're
common use.
Yeah, common use.
Speaking of which, I'm not sure if you guys are following, but there was just not a Supreme Court, but a fourth or fifth Circuit of Appeals that a federal judge ruled that machine guns are not unusual weapons.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. I heard about that.
Yes. There are enough of them that they're not unusual.
So it came down to they believe the argument is either there is 150,000 machine guns in circulation, or that are registered, or it's 700 and some odd thousand machine guns that are in circulation that aren't registered, but that makes them common.
Yeah.
So they're saying now
the judge says something like, "I disagree with this other decision that set the precedent. However, based on this precedent, this is not unusual."
Yeah, and so now that kind of opens up the interpretation for a Supreme Court ruling where they could they're saying that it probably won't happen, but it could potentially make it so that the Supreme Court could rule that machine guns are legal because they're not an unusual weapon. I think that would just make me happy.
I saw that. FFL and SOTs that were ready.
Yes.
So we can start selling auto sears.
I'm at flood market. I would make them for cheap. Here, $10. It's yours. $10. It's yours. Go.
The lawyer that I was watching was also talking about how, like, the other thing too is the thing that makes them not in common use is not something about them. they're not in common use because of the NFA. Like, it was government restriction that made them not in common use, not just because.
Were you watching TFB? Was it James Reeves on TFB?
I think so.
Yeah, that's one of the ones I watched too.
But yeah, but he was talking about how can you justify this not being in common use when it's not in common use because you're not letting it be in common use? Like, that's such a reasoning.
Yeah. I feel like
Minuteman FFL, man. I'm telling you, I would do it. I'd be like, here's the auto sears, go. Just buy a gun, get an auto sear.
We're breaking even.
go.
For as much as
it's a charity project.
Yes.
Or we'll just get a bunch of 3D printers and then stuff like Yankee Boogles will be legal.
Yes.
Print a ton of Yankee Boogles, sell them for $1 each.
Yes.
Actually, I'm not sure we can talk about that on YouTube.
I don't even know what that is. So.
Okay, well, I don't know what it is either.
Yeah, I would never, ever sell it.
Just leave out what you said. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know. You guys got anything else? I think we covered everything.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this was a good one. I like this one.
Yeah. Nick, anything else?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Well, then, thank you everybody who's watching and made it to the end.
Yes.
You can subscribe on YouTube. We're also on Spotify, except a little bit behind. I need to get stuff up on Spotify more. Check us out at MinutemanTheory.com. We're also on Instagram and Twitter, or X, and
Facebook.
Yes. And I think that's it.
Well, hey guys, I want to tell you, get out there and get some first aid training. If you're around an ambulance corps, I'm sure they would love nothing more. I know that here they give classes every month. They do a class, and they love to have the public attend. Just go and talk to one of your local EMTs and find out, because like we had talked about, somebody's going to get injured, someone you know or someone you care about, and you as well could be injured. You may not need that gun, but you're definitely going to need that first aid training.
Mm-hmm. Nick, any last words?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, see you in episode 6.